Hey, welcome back to the Firebreak. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Firebreak is sponsored by Team Wildfire. We're developing new techniques and technologies to make wildfires less devastating to the communities they impact, which is everyone. I've got the amazing Charles Truettner. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Truettner.
Truettner, even
Yeah,
better. Charles Truettner, who is a climate scientist and wildfire carbon interface expert, who's written at least 9 major publications on this field. And Charles, welcome to the show. First off, how are you?
I'm doing good. Just enjoying a Friday morning. How are you
Yeah.
doing?
And I see you're just to our north up there in Fort Collins.
That's correct. Yep.
I'm in. So in Boulder we say, oh, we're just north of Denver, and I guess in Fort Collins you say we're just north of Boulder, and so it goes. Huh?
That's right. Yeah, we're officially NoCal, Northern Colorado.
No, Cal. Okay, and where's that line start?
Maybe Loveland. I don't know. I guess you can also think of NoCal as Winter Park and Granby and that kind of area too.
Okay.
So yeah, the
So
latitude I think is up for debate.
yeah, it is. So you do climate science, which is certainly broader than fire ecology or fire science.
Mhm.
What are the big things that you're seeing trending right now in terms of the problems and the solutions and the area in between, which is where we're thinking about the problem, but we don't have the solution?
Yeah. So I think the two major problems you're seeing with a warming climate would be in two different kind of areas or regions that are being most affected. One are the deserts and subtropical regions. So where it's already hot and dry, it's getting hotter and drier. And then the other one is in the Arctic, where we're starting to see the temperatures rise much faster than any other places around the world. And so, as you can imagine, both of those kind of trajectories are really influencing how the ecosystems respond to large disturbances like wildfires or insect outbreaks. And so that's kind of where I come in. I would call myself a forest ecologist, meets a fire ecologist, meets a climate scientist, and look at those interactions and try to figure out, maybe what some of the solutions could be as well.
So you've really done quite a bit of in-depth work, multidisciplinarily,
Mm-hmm.
if that's a word, because these things interface, so much that you can't look at climate without looking fire and vice versa. And how
Mm-hmm.
does it all fit together? And, the Arctic is probably warming the most because, it's got the most room to warm, right? The
That's
rest
a
of
good
it's
point.
already pretty hot. Uh, now, what about in the desert? Does it matter if the uninhabitably hot deserts are just getting more uninhabitably hot?
Well, it's kind of a funny question because even you look at a city like Phoenix, it's really growing so much faster than a lot of other cities, even if it's in the desert. And so I think when it comes to the question of how deserts are being affected is really water security. We can see that Lake Powell and Lake Mead are they are rebounding a little bit with these kind of wetter winters we've had, but when you look at the last kind of climate interval, which we usually use as a 30-year interval, it's down a lot. And that's worrying because the populations are increasing as well. So, and then if you can imagine it on an ecosystem view, if that water is not getting to the forests and it's not getting even, you can think about it to the croplands, right? Then you're starting to just get a lot more dead biomass buildup. And so that can then kind of extend the amount of fire, like the actual size of a fire, but it can also increase the severity too. So, um, and before I go too far, there's another kind of feedback as well that's worth explaining. So I cover the angle here, and that is if we do have a wet winter or a wet spring, and there can be a lot of plants, primary productivity, and so we'd have a lot of biomass accumulated one year, and then if the next year we have a very dry winter and a dry spring, then all that biomass dries up, and that is even more of an impact and kind of can increase that fire risk.
And that impact can even happen within the same season if you have, right, a wet spring and a dry end of summer.
Correct. Yep.
You don't
And
have
so,
to wait, right? You don't have to wait for next year for it to dry and burn.
yes, that's right. And so that's, people are generally, instead of saying fire season, they are now trying to use fire year, right?
Right. Like a fiscal year.
Yep.
Yeah. So I would say it would be a pretty safe bet to say it's a given that these areas that are drying out are gonna burn.
I mean, there's
Like
more,
right,
the likelihood is definitely increased.
you have enough dry powder laying around, somebody's gonna show up with the spark,
That's right.
whether it's lightning, someone's catalytic converter driving off the road,
Right.
an EV fire that gets spread, a home fire that has a big ember cast. Like, it's gonna go if you can't keep it wet.
Yeah.
Um, so, uh, and when it goes, is it going to make neighboring areas uninhabitable? If the areas around Phoenix, for instance, burn, um, are people going to stay? Why are people Why are more people moving to places where it's already inhospitably hot, and they're
Mhm.
about to run out of water, and it's about to burn up?
That's
Like,
a great question,
right?
and
It's
I
just
don't know
like,
if I have an answer for
does climate does not play a role in people's decisions about where to locate?
I mean, I think that when you're looking at places like Phoenix and Las Vegas is another prime example of this. Those are just the actual tech industry is really growing, and so I think that just brings people to the city because of the job, right, and the opportunities. I think other people, even if they're coming, say, from the East Coast, where they may be more city locked, they're looking to get out west where they have more access to nature. And
Sure.
then they kind of, follow up with your first question. If those wildfires are getting closer and closer to the wildland urban interface, then that really does have an effect on property value, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, you're not going to be seeing the same type of expansion, at least into that wildland side of the interface, which I think, I would say that where where humans as a species need to kind of develop is more of a vertical build instead of an expansion build. So,
So
so
cities,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of us. We need cities, right? And we
right.
need and just really having buildings, right, and taller buildings instead of kind of like sparse suburbia, that area, which is great to live in, and I understand where families especially want to have their own house and their own yard. But when it comes to, yeah, encroaching into that wildland and then having a higher chance of having a wildfire come and burn your property and your house, then you kind of have to weigh your risks there.
Let me back up on it. Something you said that I wanted to follow up on. You talked about property values.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is the decline in property values, which is based to say, you know, I'm now looking out at a burned scar instead of a beautiful view.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I can't sell my house for as much. Or in some places, my insurance company has pulled out, so now I can only
Mm-hmm.
sell to cash buyers. Right?
Mm-hmm.
These things would both lower demand and lower prices. So, are we looking at the net difference between what a house was worth and what a house will be worth in this post-fire environment, or post-fire environment that's already happened? Is that loss being included in the economic costs of wildfires?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm sure there is. This isn't quite my specialty, but so I can assume that depreciation of property value is probably looked at. It's probably one of those minor variables that people aren't quite as concerned about.
Yeah,
because you do still have this out west, you have this increase in property value that just seems to just keep on, exponentially growing almost. So it's
sure.
kind of when you're talking about, the property value, it might balance out, but again, it's still, you can imagine, yeah, if you're in some type of burnscape and a burn scar, right, you're just not going to get the same appeal. You're not going to get, you know, buyers maybe having some type of kind of back and forth, right? I can't think of the actual term of it right now, but it's
Negotiation.
that, yeah, but like
When you cut
more
down those
competition.
trees, you just get meadows, right? So
Yeah,
a burn scar doesn't have to look like a bunch of burnt out trees for 30 years the way it does, here in Sunshine Canyon. Uh, you could cut that down and you'd get beautiful grazing meadows, within the year.
yeah. Well, and now you bring up a really great point, and that is, what is the angle of trying to kind of what are the solutions of trying to counter these wildfires and the increases of CO2 and different particulate matter that does end up getting into the atmosphere. And that's reforestation. We really see that as a really great nature-based solution to combat these different negative effects of wildfires. And if you do have proper management and there's funding, tons of funding that private landowners can apply for, and then come in and then get their burn scar all or whatever property might have been of their property might have been burned, they can get that managed correctly, and then have a nice tree planting session in there as well.
Yep.
And that can even benefit whoever is, if it's a corporation or if it's a government entity or something that are promoting those plantings, right? And so this kind of gets into the whole carbon credit market. And so, if a company is expelling so much CO2 with production or whatever transport, then if they can counter that with reforestation and then having that, you can imagine the trees are then bringing in the carbon dioxide.
Right.
That's kind of where we're seeing this reforestation market going. And I don't know if you want to call it a reforestation market, that's a stretch.
Yeah.
But the general carbon credit market.
So,
um,
so you said there's stashes of money out there for proper burn scar remediation.
mhm,
Who's giving out that money? What are these grant programs? Because I have a friend who just lost 11 of his acres to a wildfire,
mhm,
and he called a landscaping company and said, "Hey, can you cut down these trees and get them out of here and plant some new trees?" And they said, "Sure, $2.5 million
mhm,
bucks, happy to do it."
mhm. Yeah, that's quite a amount there. But I think it's, and California is leading the way right now in this. And so if you're talking to a lot of state forests, then they might be able to help, especially if you're kind of up against some type of state forest boundary.
Yeah.
I think the national forests are trying to kind of be more supportive of that as well. And they're, when you're working at a national scale, it might take a little bit longer than a state scale. But I know that, for instance, in California, you can get, I think every Californian has is able to get 100 free tree seedlings a year, I think. And
Wow.
so they have like these promotions for their citizens to go and really do their planting themselves, right?
And what
So
should they be planting? If they want to promote diversity, do they do a monoculture stand, or does that not matter if it's only 100 trees,
mm-hmm.
or are there more fire resistant species they can work with?
That's a great question, and that is where I think this reforestation kind of whole entire idea of reforestation is going. Is that instead of planting these monoculture forests, it's really turning into how can we make this more biodiverse and how can we make these forested ecosystems more sustainable with how the climate could be changing in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I could. I
So
mean, I could easily see if it's a government planting program, and they heard, "Hey, we should be giving away trees." Awesome. Let's get a bunch of juniper and give it to people. Not realize, right? That they're throwing more fuel on the ground. Uh,
yeah,
right.
yeah, and
So these programs really need to be informed by people like you, Charles.
yeah, and the organization I work for now, it's called American Forests, and I'm the senior manager of climate science at American Forests. They're really on the forefront of trying to make these management decisions with science and data backing, and so that's kind of when you have organizations that are really kind of tuned into that and have an impact. American Forest has been around since 1875, and
Wow.
so yeah, so it's been we're about to celebrate our 150th year, and so you can imagine we've worked with the Forest Service quite a bit, and so and Forest Service research ecologists, they all know this as well, right? So it's not
Hmm.
like the Forest Service is not aware of like, hey, we need to promote biodiversity. But when you're talking about monocultural projects and planting, one of the hardest parts of this whole reforestation pipeline is the nursery component, and what type of nurseries can grow what type of species. And if they're more, there's such a limit to how many of these seedlings you can actually purchase for the planting projects. And so I think that American Forests, and there's other organizations too. National Forest Foundation is another good example of this. But they really are trying to promote not just growing a million ponderosa pines, right? Because that's
Right.
kind of what might be the easiest to grow. So and to kind of like further go down that avenue a little bit, um, another thing that really limits that kind of biodiversity of planting is that some of these species of trees are just kind of fit a little bit more of this, buck a tree. That's kind of the thing, $1 a tree. You get about $1 a tree seedling framework. And that might work for something that grows easy, right? That can kind of just, pop up. It's no big deal. But if you're trying to grow something that's a little bit more difficult, then $1 a tree isn't really going to work out, right? The nursery isn't going to be making enough money to really be growing a diversity of trees
Unless it's subsidized, right?
unless it's subsidized. And that's, I think, a great avenue that can be explored, right? And I'm sure it's been, I don't know too much about this either, but and I'm sure it's been talked about, and I'm sure there is some initiative to that as well.
Well,
But I
I
think
probably
that'd be a
shouldn't
great
ask you
option.
about all the things that you don't know about when there's so many things that you do know about. Uh, right. Of the many buckets, and really it's massive, right? You get into hydrology,
Mm-hmm.
ecology, conservation, biology.
Mm-hmm.
You've really um, learned at least a little bit about a lot of things, probably a lot about some things. Um, which area of your study do you think, the most impactful on reducing the 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 damaging influences of wildfire?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm not the manager that's going to be out there thinning forests. I do on my own property and that kind of thing, but where I see my skills lying is really uh, scientific outreach
Okay.
and
And what
trying
does that mean? Reaching out to other scientists, or scientists reaching out to the community, or
scientists reaching out to the community
okay.
and really describing, there is a big push of saying, hey, fire is healthy, right? This is, not all fires are bad, right?
Right.
And so, promoting that idea of hey, this prescribed fire is happening, warning the community that it's happening, making sure they understand what's going on, so that there isn't some type of fear of a prescribed fire. That communication I think is really impactful. Uh, and then also explaining things like fire windows, prescribed fire windows. When is the right time to burn? And
And then does that vary by species and by ground cover? And
it can
are we
definitely
learning those sophisticated lessons from people who have doing you know tribal or aboriginal burning for thousands of years? Like,
Yeah.
Are we doing it, using the knowledge that's been accumulated, or are we just hearing, oh, burning's good, go light a fire?
No, definitely learning more about traditional ecological knowledge and using that knowledge from native tribes that are in the area. I think is really key, and that people are definitely getting more involved with that. And I think communicating about different forest types, and different forest types have different fire return intervals, right? So you can imagine in the Southwest, where we're kind of looking at this desert forest interface, and that interface, generally is moving higher in elevation and northern in latitude, right? Deserts are expanding. And if you look at ponderosa pine, the kind of natural fire regime, could be just a simple little surface fire that might happen every 7 to 11 years, right?
Okay.
And it's just kind of cruising through. It's burning some of the grass. It's maybe burning some of the seedlings, or we call it dog hair thickets, right? Like just kind of getting rid of that understory that could be used as, if it does continue to grow, it can be used as a ladder to then the fire to reach the canopy, and then we have a canopy crown fire, right? And
Right.
that's just a higher severity. It can spread much quicker and with much more intensity. And so kind of to just communicate to the public that, hey, this is just a simple little surface fire. It's we've got it managed. This is better than, say, if there's a lightning strike in a non-managed area. So I think that's where I feel like I have the most impact, is that communication. Because then you could also say, hey, if you look at these mountains, say in northern Arizona, we've got the San Francisco peaks that get up to over 12,000 feet, and they have spruce fir forest habitat up there. And fires are not as common. They can be 100 to 400 years interval, fire return interval,
Well,
right?
there's no oxygen up there. Try to take a breath.
Yeah, and so just kind of describing what this natural range of variability is with fire return intervals is just something that I think is crucial for people to understand, especially going back to if you're buying some property and you're worried about how frequent the fires are there. It's good to know.
So, and I'm surprised, but you're the first person I've heard talk about, and probably because I haven't talked to enough people, but talking about the temporal nature of the fire cycle. Well, maybe I have heard about it and I forgot. I forgot a lot. But when you buy a property, they tell you like, oh, you're in a 100-year floodplain or in a 500-year floodplain, but they don't disclose, maybe because it hasn't been a topic yet, what 100-year floodplain equivalent are you in the fire plane? You're in a 50-year fire plane and you're 20 years into it. You might have odds are you got 30 years. So if you're only going to live here 7, you're fine.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought, and that probably should be accounted for. And it might be in insurance, right? When you're getting fire insurance, they might have an idea of what is your surrounding forest and what is that fire return interval.
Well, the actuarians who inform insurance companies, their data seems to be managed with a pretty heavy hand. The idea that you should pull out of an entire state because some small portion of it, represents a pretty high wildfire risk, looks like they're leaving money on the table to me, and that fires don't happen across a whole state; they happen in certain microclimates where the conditions are ripe for them. And are you seeing that we need to see more data about more granular level knowledge of where the risks are higher versus lower?
Absolutely. I mean, the more data, the more quality data, right? The better. So, what you put in, if you put in bad data, you're going to have bad models, right? Yep. And so, the more quality data, the better. The finer granularity resolution, we kind of call it resolution in modeling terms, definitely helps you understand the heterogeneity of the different landscape, right? And so you can think about it, and this is a very severe generalization, but like northern aspects are going to be cooler usually, right? They might hold snow longer. They might be moist. They might have higher moisture content. But then southern sides of slopes and, of mountains, they're going to get more sun. They're going to get drier. There can be a different forest type than there is on the northern aspect. And so accounting for that type of topography would be totally beneficial for fire risk, and instead of trying to say just, oh, this region is not as stable as maybe we thought it was.
And you live in the Front Range, so I'm sure you've had the experience of looking at the ridges that you're facing and seeing
Mm-hmm.
snow field, snow field, snow field, right? That
Mm-hmm.
everything southern facing is dry and growing and grassy, and
Mm-hmm.
everything north facing still has snow on it, and that
Right.
seems to persist, like regardless of what the outdoor temperature is.
Mm-hmm.
It's 60
Absolutely.
degrees, and I'm on an unsnowy hill here, and I'm staring across at a hill that's snowy all year round.
Mm-hmm.
So our fire risk should be different. So to come in and say, we're just not covering this whole area, we're
Mm-hmm.
jacking everybody's premiums,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's heavy-handed. Is that because it takes a long time for the data and the what you call the resolution,
Mm-hmm.
the higher
The
resolution
granularity,
data,
yeah, they,
the
they kind of go
granularity,
hand in
right?
hand term.
That it
Yeah.
just takes longer for that to trickle into the industry, from your logbook to their actuarial table?
Yeah, and when I'm thinking about resolution or granularity, a lot of that comes from remote sensing, from satellites, and
Mhm.
that data is available, right? Those data are available. Those different data layers are available. They might just not be incorporated quite yet.
I
And
see.
so,
Okay.
and it's not that they probably aren't aware of it, right? They probably do know about it. They're just not necessarily, you know, that hasn't been in their kind of thought process when evaluating risk, right?
Yeah. And I'm really curious as to why the insurance company wouldn't be really leading the technology for climate risk improvement in general,
Mm-hmm.
and for direct wildfire suppression, because
Mm-hmm.
it seems that, yes, we all pay the price that we're breathing crappy air, but they're actually paying a financial price connected to each fire.
Mm-hmm.
In If you take the health part out of it, financially, I'd say they have the most to lose, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, the most to gain from improved suppression strategies. Are you seeing them move into that space at all? Are they telling the fire department, like, hey, what you're doing isn't working and it's costing us billions of dollars. Here's some new technology that you could put to use to help
Mm-hmm.
us reduce our losses, and you have a better win rate.
Mm-hmm. Again, probably not the best one to answer this
Okay.
one. That's kind of more of like the management field. I'm more
Okay.
on the science management
Okay.
intersection,
So
right?
so if you were the climate czar,
Yeah.
and you could force all of the changes you wanted to see,
Uh-huh.
what would be on your list?
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely, it's home hardening or community hardening is kind of a buzzword that you start hearing a lot of things like people like the Wildfire Task Force, right? There's a couple
Yeah.
of task forces in states that are really focused on that. And so I think, putting that investment in people's homes where you are doing a proper job thinning around your property, especially, where your buildings are, that's the number one kind of easiest thing to do, right? Cut those
Sure.
low hanging branches, make sure that you don't have any of their higher branches that are kind of like hitting your roof or getting close to that, get rid of those ones. But also just making sure that you're not allowing the fire to kind of enter your house as well. And so, and I can't remember the term exactly for this, but but there might be a little kind of gap in your window or something, like on kind of the side of your window, and that can end up acting as kind of a vacuum when temperatures are hotter in your house, and that would just draw in the fire to kind of become more destructive. So things like that, that's like the home hardening kind of strategy.
Yeah.
Community hardening, I think, is just having people, awareness and kind of that understanding that if there is a fire that's coming in, what do you do? What can we do to prevent that wildfire in like our surrounding forests?
Okay. So the individual home hardening,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is something that you know every person can do
Mm-hmm.
or contract to have done to
Mm-hmm.
reduce the likelihood that their home is going to burn. What
Mm-hmm.
about things that the individual can do that reduce the overall uh, climate that encourages wildfire or
Mm-hmm.
or damaging wildfire?
Oh yeah. Well, of course we could drive less and contribute less carbon dioxide. Work from home revolution is maybe helping drive that. Switching to EVs or hybrid automobiles is definitely something I think the industry has caught on to. It's becoming more popular. So that's kind of really the direct, what the most direct cause is really these CO2 emissions, right?
Okay.
Methane's another big kind of chemical compound that we have to worry about as well. But really, it's the release of anthropogenic CO2 that's driving the increase in temperature globally.
So even though methane is a much more powerful insulative blanket, it,
Mm-hmm.
CO2 is still worse
Well, because
because
there's
there's
just so
more of
much
it.
more of it.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the issue. And so trying to limit your emissions is the best you can do to help slow the effects of climate change, right? Slow the velocity of climate change. And that's
Since you mentioned work from home, and
uh-huh.
I know that that you and your scientific community, littered the world with sensors, and thanks for doing that. Um, when COVID hit and we saw people stop going to work in
Hmm.
large numbers,
Hmm.
were there measurable climate impacts for the better from all that reduced commuting?
There were. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it, and I can't give you the exact numbers, but it didn't slow. There was still increase of warming, but there was a slowdown, right?
A
A
decrease in the
decrease.
rate of increase,
Yeah. Yeah.
as Richard
Decrease.
Nixon described the economy for inflation.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. It did decrease the velocity, right?
Okay.
There was a decrease in velocity. It's hard to really, it's not a big enough time window. Again, when we're talking about climate, we're usually talking about 30-year intervals. So we
Yeah.
can't say exactly that this is, going to be stopping the trajectory of climate change because, when you look at a 30-year window, it's still increasing, right?
Right. But
So,
you take your factors one at a time and you
mhm,
reduce them the best you can. So
mhm, yeah.
really, from a climate change, the companies that are saying, come back to work in the office or you're fired. uh, From never mind how you feel about that the impact on your life. From a climate standpoint, that's not a good choice.
I mean, I think working from home is great. I think and some people do like being in the office. I know, obviously, like things like I've worked for academia for most of my career, so being on campus and interacting with students is definitely something that has a strong appeal. But working from home, and that's what my job is now. It's great. I mean, I might drive to the grocery store,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, same here. It's great.
yeah. So
Better yet,
so
have them drive to me.
yeah. Yeah, got a pizza delivered last night, but
Right.
I think that is kind of maybe like, I'm sure, it's one of those covariables that could be one of those natural ways of kind of adapting to how to decrease the rate of
Of
warming, the
increase. Yeah.
rate of
So you said you had a pizza delivery last night,
I did.
and so I'm curious to know, um, was it a wood burning stove, wood fired pizza or gas fired pizza?
I think it was a gas fired pizza. So
Okay, so
yeah.
that would have more of a negative impact versus the wood fire stoves, which create a market for uh, wood consumption,
Mm.
which supposedly, right, would, yes, we're still burning the trees, but we're burning them at a slower rate. So the severity of the impact is less.
Yeah,
So,
you bring up a really good question there is, what about wood stoves versus gas stoves? And being in Boulder, you've probably heard about the restrictions, definitely in Denver, and this might be in Boulder too, but they're not allowing any more.
yeah, try to pry my gas stove from my cold, dead hands.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about even a wood burning stove, it's like no way, right? But it's and it's a tough one because like I will admit I do like a gas grill, or a gas stove more than I do an electric stove.
I mean, unless you
But
want Hank Hill knocking on your door, you better go with the propane, right?
yeah, so it's a tough one, and but the other thing is that a lot of this byproduct from thinning projects really is supplies some of this wood that people use in their residential homes, right? And
Right.
so it's that is kind of a tricky kind of topic, to really talk about. But what you do with the timber that necessarily is like thought of as slash, after you go to do some type of thinning, and then you have these piles of slash that could just be burned in big piles, or can they be used for something else, right? And so I think that
Paper
that's
towels, right?
yeah. I mean, you could, yeah, right, or different boards. It's the terms not. It's kind
Or
of
OSB or,
OSB, exactly. Yep.
yeah,
And so it's if that's the kind of wood product that would be less impactful than if you're burning residential wood, right?
sure.
So there is, I mean, but again, it's tricky because I lived in California for 2 winters, right? And we was on an old farm. We had a iron fire stove, and that was what warmed the. We were in a barn apartment, and so that's what we had, and it was nice, enjoyable. I like cutting wood. I like it's something that I enjoy. So
Yeah. Well, if you've ever taken a blowtorch that has ingress holes where
mhm,
the air gets mixed in
mhm,
before uh, combustion,
mhm,
uh, and you leave those holes unencumbered, you get a nice clean blue flame with not a lot of carbon particulate. If you cover the holes and you force the propane to come out and scour oxygen, you get this really inefficient
mhm,
red yellow flame,
mhm,
which is dirtier to the environment. Um, are we seeing changes in wood burning stoves where you could minimize the soot secretion from it by
mhm,
making it a forced air stove?
mhm,
When you blow air into that, you get much cleaner combustion, and that might be able to allow you to have wood burning stoves, which would be great for consuming that wood, that pelletized, otherwise useless wood,
mhm,
without being such a soot generator.
mhm. Yeah, I know. What I do know of that is that EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is putting new and stricter standards on wood burning stoves. I think when I lived in Flagstaff for a long time, there you could still get wood burning stoves installed, but there was a much higher standard of how that all that soot would be collected.
Okay.
And so yeah, that is definitely something that is a nationwide kind of policy that people
Okay.
are doing. So yeah, but
And
the outright just ban of gas or wood fire pits is and I don't want to get political here, but it does seem kind of extreme,
Draconian, yeah.
But I understand where they're coming from to switch to electric. So and this is kind of, where we stand as humans, what are we going to be giving up versus what do we want to continue to kind of adapt to, right? And how can we
Yeah.
adapt what we
And what are
have?
the barriers, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm not going to switch to electric heat or electric stove
Mhm.
because of my distrust of issues, legitimate distrust of grid resilience issues,
Mhm.
right? That when it's, minus 30 degrees here and the grid goes down because, whether it's locally a tree fell into my power line or the national grid is 100 years overdue for rebuilding.
Mhm.
If I can't trust that I'm going to get electricity, I'm much more hesitant to become more dependent on it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something. What's important is for the public to express their opinion,
Hmm.
when there are these time periods where the government opens up some type of public opinion or public request. They give I think it's usually a 3-month window or maybe more before some type of policy might go into act.
But is
So
that reliable if the public hasn't been informed? Then it becomes then
mm,
your climate policy becomes a popularity contest rather than a science driven venture.
mhm,
So how do you influence, like in your job? How do you take your data and
mhm,
package that so that you have an informed public, so that when they are invited to uh, offer their opinions, they're scientifically based?
mhm. Yeah, I think what we're doing right now, and I can speak for American Forests, the organization I work for now, is we're trying to create a community platform. We're calling it the
Okay.
Forest Innovation Platform to bring in all of these different data sets and tools. A lot of it has to do with GIS, looking at them spatially, and trying to make that not just used for people like me who are climate scientists, data scientists, those type, but for people that have their private lands that they want to manage as well. And so it's just kind of an easier interface to be able to look at the data and use those data to be able to kind of help your decision that you're going to be making. And so that's kind of what a project that I'm really working on right now is really trying to bring in all these different actors that are interested in mostly, like I say, these spatial data sets, that you can just kind of zoom into either your area where you're going to be doing some type of treatment, or if it is your private land as well and you want to be able to do some type of treatment with it. So it's kind of both. We're trying to work with all different entities, public, private.
Without creating a data overload
Hmm.
where you give people so much information that they just have no idea what to make of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess as a professional scientist,
Hmm.
you kind of have to be a gateway keeper, as
Hmm.
like, here's the information people need to know to make informed decisions,
Hmm.
without requiring that they dedicate hundreds of hours a month to figuring out what this data means.
Yeah, you're actually absolutely correct there. I mean, that's something you need to be able to translate the data to the audience that you're trying to address it to. And so I think, having that clear message and having the kind of map interface that you're using to be able to find the location, it can be as simple as using Google Maps, right? Just something where it's just a common kind of software program that people use, and you're able to really kind of look into those specific locations, download maybe, hey, what's the time series look like for how the climate has changed in the last 30 years? How is it going to be projected to change, over the next 60 years? Suggesting what species might be better to plant there that
Right.
could last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, right? Which is a huge, huge thing that I think scientists as a community are trying to understand, not only with kind of small little restoration projects that might be on private property, but also large scale planting projects and making sure that we're planting the right trees or the right biodiversity of trees too. So having multiple trees or shrubs. Right? Let's not forget about shrubs either, right?
Right.
So
Yep.
if you can plant a good representation that might really have that kind of resilience to continue to grow and be healthy, even if this region might be getting warmer and drier, right?
Yeah. Plant bamboo. Try getting rid of it. I dare you. Right.
I haven't planted bamboo ever before, but I know that can spread.
Yeah, it does. It spreads and it's harvestable, and you can make furniture and flooring and cabinets out of it, and
Yeah,
harvest it every year.
yeah,
I would imagine that the grasses of that nature would be really efficient carbon sinks.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Plus, on a board foot basis, these things are sold as premium woods.
Mm-hmm.
So when you add more profit motive into that,
Mm-hmm.
if we can marry profit with climate capture, like I would think that's the win. So
Yeah,
so
that's a
so
huge goal.
so so in terms of like findings from your research
Mm-hmm.
and turning those findings into not only actionable but
Mm-hmm.
actioned upon
Mm-hmm.
information, what do you do? Do you publish it as a new song for Beyonce, so that everyone knows it, or is it just siloed in scientific journals? How,
Yeah,
how do you get
great
the word out, really, is what
Great
I'm asking
question.
you.
Yeah, great question. I think doing podcasts like Firebreak here is one of those kind of avenues to describe science. Um, I, I right now what I've really enjoyed is there are websites that will do summaries of your journal article, right? It'll be some reporter that will interview the lead authors, or maybe the lead authors could or lead author and or co-lead authors can kind of help write um, more of just like a 2 or 3 page summary,
Yep.
and they might quote them during an interview or something like that. But then it gives a link to that article. And so, and I get them. I mean, I'm a climate science nerd, so I get them in my like Google feed, But
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to capture a broader audience.
Yeah. Right. And then, so reduce the paper to the 2 or 3 pages, and then reduce that to 140 characters,
Exactly. Yeah,
and
and just
and
and just
post
make
it.
it translatable, right? Like kind of what we were saying with what we're trying to do with the Forest Innovation Platform. Like we want it to reach a broader audience, right? Same thing. If you want your scientific article to reach a broader audience, then use those pathways that that are established, that people are interested. People want to know about science. They want to hear
Yeah, they
about the
do.
newest
They do.
trends in science.
And it seems that, sometimes science creates a bind when it's forced based on new information to flip flop on things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For the longest, I had heard, the old growth trees are already grown. They're not drawing carbon in anymore. We want to cut down the old growth and grow new trees that'll turn a little seedling into a big carbon capture.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last documentary I saw said like, oh, actually that's not true. This new growth stuff, even though yes, it's growing rapidly, it's not absorbing carbon at the rate that the old growth does, that we didn't really even realize until we put measurement stuff out over the forest.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think people just have to be open to the idea that like as we learn more,
Mm-hmm.
uh, what we knew before, we have to make room for that change. We have to be willing to pivot on that.
Yeah, and I think you have to account for risk, right? So if you have old growth forests and this tree's established, it's been there for 100, 200, 300 years, it's still, sequestering carbon, right? If you
Right.
cut that down, and it's stored carbon too, right?
Yeah.
It's there. It's not, even if you use it for some type of, furniture or home or something like that, that wood is getting moved somehow. And so usually by a large truck that's emitting CO2. And
Mm,
so you kind of have to think about that. You got to think about it holistically, and like
right.
how much are we really saving in the carbon budget? The other thing that's really worrisome is, if you're kind of replanting where old growth forests used to be, we still, it's there's more risk of that forest establishing the way that it already is, right?
Yeah.
And so, and you can think about old growth forests as being, as they're resilient. They've gone through climate circulations before, right? Cycles, right? They've gone
Yeah.
through some climate cycles. Look at bristlecone pine, right? They're still holding on. They can be over 5,000 years old. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and so for, in my opinion, this is my opinion, and I'm probably, different scientific opinions here, but leave that stored carbon where it is, right? And just let it do its kind of just let it do its thing on its own. But if there is a forest that needs to actually be thinned, or if we do need to, I mean, we still need timber, right? So,
Yeah.
if there is a forest that is primed for that type of thinning or that type of, processing, then it's like, yes, we still need to do that. And so it's a balance, and it kind of, and even almost goes back to like what I was saying with communicating different fire return intervals, right?
Hmm.
You're just saying, hey, like, how old does a forest need to be? What's a mature forest? What's an old growth forest? Communicating that to the public so they understand, why we don't want you to cut down this forest while this forest needs some, thinning or some type of treatment, right?
Yeah. Um, what are the biggest misinformations, you know, things that people, what are the things that people think about climate and wildfire resilience, that aren't true, and
Mm.
that are counter to our goals?
I think
So
that
it's called misinformation research, right? Or,
yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that people can grasp onto is the interannual variability of wildfire severity, right? And so they can say, oh, it was a really bad fire season or fire year last year, but this year it's great. We got a big wet winter.
we got it under control.
Yeah, we got it under control. And then it's like, and then it's fine, and then it's under control for, maybe there's like 3 wetter winters in a row, and so then people just kind of like say, oh, okay, we're fine, we're in the clear,
Good thing
right?
that's not a problem anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not what we're seeing, right? When you look at the long-term trends, yeah, and again, there's sometimes these kind of feedbacks that can really influence. Um, Again, like if it is really good kind of growth for 3 years, then it's really dry for 2 or 3 years. Then all that biomass is then more susceptible to burning, right? If it's not
Right.
managed correctly. And
Right. You're
so I
running up
think
your
that
fuel
that's,
debt, right?
yeah, yeah, and it's and I think another thing, and I would like to try to touch in with the Arctic a little more. We've been talking more about deserts and kind of the
Sure.
wildland urban interface there, but what I did during my postdoc, which was just my recent position, was we were looking at wildfires in kind of a natural variability, natural landscape, right? There's maybe one highway that goes through where we were studying these wildfires. So most of them, are ignited by lightning, so it's all natural, and so I think people need to understand that kind of natural regime is shifting. So it's not just where people are living; it's we can see that where people are not living, and
Through
and
through
so
the
that
impact of where people are living, or through multi-million year cycles that have nothing to do with us, or a combination?
Yeah, I mean, there is kind of there are a couple of cycles. They're called the linkage cycles, and that's I don't know if we want to go quite down that route, but that is an interesting route. But generally, and this can be kind of argued, we are supposed to be going into an ice age. We're supposed to be cooling, right? Because the mid Holocene optimum was about 6,000 years ago. And so that's when it was kind of warmest during one of those kind of shorter cycles called precession, which is kind of the way that the Earth wobbles. And that's about a 22,000 year interval there. And so
Okay.
we kind of reached that optimum 6,000 years ago. So we should be getting cooler, not dramatically, right?
Right.
But instead, we're seeing warmer, right? So we're seeing opposite of what kind of just the planetary cycles would be, right? Just the way
And
that
there
the
could be an
planet.
offsetting, right? It could be getting even hotter were it not for the wobble.
That's right.
The
Absolutely
wobble might be
correct.
helping us. So we should
Yeah.
not. So we should abort any efforts to fix the wobble.
That'd be a serious effort. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm funding that effort right after my effort to stop plate tectonics. If you could stop plate tectonics, you could eliminate almost all the earthquakes in the world. Big
Those,
undertaking, right?
those are some serious ambitions there, Steve.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, none of us have that authority yet. Charles, there's like a bazillion more questions I have for you, but we're at the top of the hour,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping. Can I schedule another appointment with you in the next
Yeah,
couple of weeks?
sure. Yeah, it was
Because I
really
really want to
fun.
hear more about the wobble, the
Yeah.
20,000 year cycle, and the Arctic,
Yeah.
and that people shouldn't say that these fires are good just because they're natural, right? We're still losing stuff that's bad, and
Yeah. I
natural doesn't
mean,
always mean good.
not all fires are bad, right?
Right.
So,
Most of them, right?
yeah. And so it's just, yeah, getting that. And I just want to kind of clarify that because it is kind of one of those things that we are trying to tell the public because it's not fire. All fire is not bad, but there are still these huge wildfires that are happening up in the Arctic that are shifting the carbon cycle, right? And are
Yeah.
creating, they're elevating the level of warming. So yeah, happy to come back on and talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about
And
that.
I went all the way up to the northern tip of Alaska
Mm.
to see this myself, and I spent a couple of weeks up there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think one of the most sophisticated atmospheric research facilities is up there.
Mm.
I used to be able to pronounce the name of the city, but now they changed it, and I have no idea how to say it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
But
spent some
but it's
time up in the interior, and yeah, it's definitely a wild area. So last frontier.
yeah, and so beautiful. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
If the people from Texas thought they had a big state, wait till they get to Alaska.
Oh,
And
I always my just to end real quick. My motto for last field season was everything's bigger in Texas, everything's a monster in Alaska.
a monster. When I went to visit Alaska, I was living in Texas at the time,
Uh-huh.
and I was frequently told that Texas is the second largest state, and that if they cut Alaska in half, Texas would be the third largest state.
Yeah.
So pretty fascinating. Charles,
Yeah.
thank you so much
Of
for
course.
joining me here on the Firebreak. If folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Oh, probably through my email. So that's C Truettner, CTruettner at americanforests.org.
Okay, and I'll put a link to your LinkedIn page
That'd be great.
on the podcast website. Charles, thank you so much again, and we're going to continue this conversation very, very soon. All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for joining us here on the Firebreak. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check out the cool innovations we're doing at teamwildfire.com, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.